Imagine standing on an empty shoreline nearly 50,000 years ago. No compass, no map, no written language, no roads, nothing but endless ocean stretching toward the horizon. Yet somewhere beyond that water lay lands no human had ever seen. And somehow, people crossed it. Not once, not by accident, but over and over again, thousands of years before the invention of sails, before metal ships, before GPS satellites guiding billions of smartphones every day. Small groups of ancient humans managed something that still amazes archaeologists. They explored continents. They crossed deserts larger than modern countries. They navigated dense forests where every direction looked identical. They climbed frozen mountain passes. They sailed between islands that disappeared beyond the curve of the earth. And somehow, they often arrived exactly where they intended. How? Because the greatest navigation system in human history wasn't made of paper, it wasn't carved into stone, and it certainly wasn't digital. It existed entirely inside the human mind. Ancient travelers memorized rivers the way we remember passwords. They read stars like modern people read street signs. They could smell the ocean before seeing it. Bird migrations became living arrows. The color of distant mountains revealed hidden water. Even the wind carried information. For thousands of generations, this invisible knowledge passed from one storyteller to another, until it allowed our ancestors to spread across nearly every corner of the planet. But this incredible achievement raises an even bigger mystery. If humans had no maps, how did they know where they were going? And perhaps even more astonishing, how did they ever find their way home? Because the answer isn't just the story of ancient travel. It's the story of how our species conquered an entire planet long before anyone ever drew the first map. If prehistoric humans had no maps, no writing, no compasses, and no GPS, how did they successfully navigate across deserts, oceans, mountains, forests, and eventually populate every continent on Earth? The first journey into the unknown. The journey began with a single step that should never have happened. Picture a small band of hunter-gatherers standing at the edge of a vast valley. Behind them lay familiar hunting grounds, the rivers they knew, the caves that had sheltered generations, the trees that marked the changing seasons. Ahead stretched an endless horizon. No trails, no villages, no signs that another human had ever walked there before. Today, most of us hesitate before driving somewhere without GPS. These people walked into continents that had never appeared on anyone's map. And somehow, they kept going. It wasn't one fearless explorer. It wasn't one legendary expedition. It was thousands of ordinary families, parents carrying children, grandparents walking beside teenagers, dogs trotting ahead, bundles of stone tools strapped across weary shoulders. Every sunrise brought a new question. Would there be water? Would there be food? Or would today's journey become the last? That uncertainty makes one simple fact almost unbelievable. Within tens of thousands of years, humans spread from Africa into Europe, Asia, Australia, and eventually the Americas. They crossed scorching deserts, climbed frozen mountain ranges, threaded through jungles alive with predators, and ventured into landscapes no member of their species had ever described. How could anyone know where to go when no one had gone before? At first glance, it almost sounds like luck, but archaeologists now believe something very different was happening. These travelers weren't wandering aimlessly. They were constantly reading clues hidden in the world around them. A river flowing in a particular direction hinted at distant valleys. A flock of birds disappearing beyond the hills suggested fresh water. Smoke on the horizon might reveal lightning or another human camp. Every footprint, every broken branch, every shift in the wind became information. To ancient people, the landscape wasn't silent, it was talking. The challenge was learning its language, and that language meant survival. A wrong decision didn't simply delay a trip. It could doom an entire family, walk toward the wrong mountain range, and winter could trap everyone beneath deep snow. Follow the wrong coastline, and fresh water might disappear for days. Misjudge the migration of animals, and hunger would arrive long before help ever could. Failure carried consequences modern travelers rarely have to imagine. Yet, generation after generation succeeded often enough to keep moving farther than any other animal of their size had ever traveled. Then, something happened that made this achievement even more astonishing. Some groups reached the edge of the sea. The land simply ended. Most creatures would have stopped there. Ancient humans didn't. Instead, they looked beyond the horizon, saw possibility, where others saw an impossible barrier. and prepared for journeys that would carry them across open water into worlds completely invisible from shore. The question was no longer how they crossed land. The real mystery was how they learned to navigate an ocean that offered no paths at all. Nature was their GPS. Standing on an empty plain at sunrise, an ancient traveler didn't see wilderness. They saw directions. Where we notice a beautiful landscape, they noticed information. The rising sun wasn't simply the beginning of another day. It was a giant compass climbing into the sky. Every morning and evening, it reminded experienced travelers where east and west lay, allowing them to keep a steady course across country that looked almost identical in every direction. But the sun disappeared every night. That's when an even older guide took over. Long before telescopes existed, humans had become expert readers of the stars. Imagine lying beside a campfire after a long day's walk. Children listened as elders pointed toward bright constellations slowly rotating across the heavens. Those stars weren't stories alone. They were landmarks that never moved from one season to the next. Unlike a modern street sign, the night sky covered the entire world. As long as the clouds stayed away, the heavens quietly whispered where home was. But that's only part of the story, because ancient navigators rarely depended on just one clue. They trusted many clues at the same time. If birds flew overhead at dawn, they asked a question. Where are they going? Many birds travel between feeding grounds and fresh water every single day. Following their flight could mean the difference between filling empty water skins or facing deadly thirst before sunset. The wind spoke as well. People living near coastlines learned that sea breezes and land breezes followed reliable rhythms. Experienced hunters could sometimes smell salt water long before they saw it. Others recognized damp air drifting from rivers hidden beyond forests. Even insects became accidental guides. Large swarms often gathered near wetlands, while certain plants thrived only where underground water rested close to the surface. Nothing was ignored. Not the color of distant mountains, not the shape of clouds, not the sound of frogs after dark. Every detail added another piece to an invisible puzzle. Modern scientists sometimes describe this as building a cognitive map, a remarkably detailed picture of the landscape stored entirely inside the brain. Instead of relying on a single route, ancient people understood how rivers connected to valleys, where herds migrated during different seasons, and which hills offered safe viewpoints over unfamiliar country. It was astonishingly flexible. If a river flooded, they didn't panic. If a forest burned, they adapted. Their map lived in memory, not on paper. And perhaps the greatest advantage of all was this: nature constantly updated itself. Animal tracks, fresh footprints, flowering plants, changing winds, and shifting stars provided new information every single day. The Earth itself became the map. Yet one mystery still remained. Reading nature could help someone survive a journey. But how could anyone remember thousands of miles of routes, landmarks, waterholes, dangerous places, and seasonal changes without writing a single word? The answer would become one of humanity's greatest inventions, one that existed not in stone, but in memory itself. The invisible maps inside the human mind. Imagine trying to remember every road in your country, every river, every mountain pass, every place where clean water can be found after a drought, every dangerous canyon to avoid during the rainy season. Now, imagine doing it without writing down a single word. That sounds impossible. Yet for tens of thousands of years, this was exactly how humans navigated the world. Their greatest map wasn't rolled into a scroll. It wasn't carved into stone. It lived inside thousands of human minds. Every child was born into a living library. Around glowing campfires, after the day's hunt had ended, elders didn't simply entertain children with stories. They were quietly teaching geography. A tale about a clever hunter might also describe 3 rivers, a distinctive cliff, a cave filled with bats, and the safest crossing through a mountain pass. A story about a giant eagle could secretly be a lesson about dangerous winds near a particular valley. Even myths carried practical directions. To an outsider, they sounded like legends. To the people listening, they were survival manuals. But that's only the beginning. Many indigenous cultures developed astonishing techniques for storing enormous amounts of geographical knowledge. In Australia, for example, generations created what researchers now call songlines. Example: songs whose verses described landmarks, waterholes, hills, stars, and sacred places in the exact order they appeared across the landscape. As long as someone remembered the song, they could follow the land. Imagine using your favorite playlist as a GPS. Each verse became another step forward. Each melody reminded travelers where to turn. Miss a verse, and you might miss an entire river. It sounds almost unbelievable, Yet these oral maps allowed people to navigate across immense distances with remarkable accuracy for thousands of years. And that's when things become even stranger. Modern neuroscience suggests our brains are naturally built for this kind of navigation. Deep inside the brain lies a network of specialized cells, often called place cells, and grid cells that work together like an internal positioning system. In other words, long before humanity invented GPS, evolution had already installed one. Ancient people simply trained it far more intensely than most of us ever will. They noticed every unusual tree, oddly shaped boulder, waterfall, cliff, or bend in a river. These landmarks became mental checkpoints, stitched together into enormous invisible maps that grew richer with every journey. The more they traveled, the more detailed those maps became. Knowledge wasn't owned by one explorer. It belonged to the entire community. One family remembered the northern valleys. Another knew the coastline. Experienced hunters memorized animal migrations. Gatherers knew where edible plants appeared after seasonal rains. When these pieces came together, an entire landscape emerged inside the collective memory of the tribe. But even the most detailed mental map had one frightening limitation. It worked only if there was land beneath your feet. Soon, some humans would face a challenge unlike anything their ancestors had ever known, a world with no mountains, no rivers, no landmarks, only an endless horizon of open sea, crossing oceans without charts. The shoreline stretched endlessly in both directions. Behind these ancient travelers lay everything they had ever known. Ahead was nothing but open water. No islands were visible. No mountain peaks broke the horizon. Just an empty blue world where a single mistake meant disappearing forever. Most animals would have turned back. Humans did something extraordinary. They built boats, not towering wooden ships with sails and anchors, not even the sturdy fishing vessels we know today. The first watercraft were probably simple rafts or dugout canoes, tied together with vines, bark, and plant fibers. By modern standards, they looked fragile, hardly the kind of craft anyone would trust on the open sea. Yet they carried one of history's greatest adventures. Archaeologists believe that at least 50,000 years ago, humans reached the continent we now call Australia. But there was one enormous problem. Even during periods of much lower sea levels, Australia was never completely connected to mainland Asia. At some point, people had to cross open water. That wasn't an accident. You don't accidentally drift across dozens of miles of ocean carrying entire families, stone tools, food supplies, and the determination to build a new life. Someone planned the journey. Someone gathered materials. Someone believed there was land beyond the horizon even if they couldn't see it. That should have been impossible. But the evidence keeps growing. Ancient stone tools, campsites, and human remains reveal that these crossings happened far earlier than researchers once imagined. Every new archaeological discovery pushes back the timeline, forcing historians to rethink just how capable our ancestors really were. So, how did they navigate an ocean with no landmarks? The answer lies in becoming students of the sea. Experienced navigators learned that the ocean was never truly empty. Ocean swells traveled in steady directions for hundreds of miles, even when local winds changed. By feeling the rhythm beneath their boats, sailors could recognize whether they were drifting off course. Clouds became clues as well. Certain clouds formed repeatedly above large islands, where warm land pushed moist air upward. Long before an island appeared on the horizon, its clouds announced its presence. Birds revealed even more. Seabirds often left land each morning to hunt and returned before nightfall. Watching their flight at sunrise or sunset could point directly toward islands hidden beyond the curve of the earth. Even floating branches, drifting seaweed, or changes in the color of the water hinted that land might be nearby. Nothing was random. Everything became information. Then something happened that changed history forever. These early crossings proved that humans were no longer limited by the edges of continents. The oceans, once thought to be barriers, became highways. Generation after generation pushed farther, eventually reaching islands scattered across the vast Pacific places, separated by thousands of miles of open water. It remains one of humanity's greatest achievements in exploration. But behind every successful voyage was a decision made by a real person. Someone had to stand on the shore, look into the unknown, and say one simple word. Go. Who were those people brave enough to take the very first step into an ocean no human had ever crossed before? The first one to say, "Follow me." History remembers kings. It remembers emperors. It remembers famous explorers whose names fill textbooks. But it forgot perhaps the greatest explorers of them all. The first people who walked into places where no human had ever been. Imagine one of them. Not a legendary hero, just an ordinary hunter in his late 20s. His hair is tangled by the wind. His spear has been repaired so many times that fresh wood no longer matches the old shaft. Around him stand perhaps 30 people, children clinging to their mothers, elders moving more slowly than they once did, hunters quietly watching the horizon. Their food is running low. The herds they followed for generations have changed direction. Winter is coming earlier than expected. Staying where they are may be just as dangerous as leaving. So someone has to decide. Not because they are the strongest, not because they are the chief, but because everyone is looking at them. Which way? No map can answer. No ancestor has ever visited the land ahead. Every decision is a gamble with dozens of lives. The scout kneels and presses a hand into the soil. The tracks are fresh. A herd passed here not long ago. Nearby, broken branches reveal animals moving north. Birds circle in the distance before disappearing beyond a ridge. A cool breeze carries the faint scent of fresh water. To most of us, these are tiny, meaningless details. To this traveler, they form a sentence. The land is speaking. He simply knows how to listen, but that's only part of the burden. Leading people wasn't just about finding food. It meant carrying responsibility for every child who stumbled across rocky ground, every elder whose strength faded before sunset, every newborn wrapped against the cold. Imagine lying awake beside the fire. The group sleeps. The stars slowly drift overhead. Tomorrow's path exists only inside your mind. If you're wrong, everyone suffers. That kind of responsibility leaves no room for pride. Only careful observation, only patience, only trust in knowledge gathered over a lifetime. And perhaps something else, hope. Because every journey promised more than survival. Beyond the next valley might be richer hunting grounds, a warmer climate, cleaner rivers, safer places to raise children. The possibility of a better future has always been one of humanity's strongest motivations. In many ways, these ancient scouts were doing something surprisingly familiar. Modern entrepreneurs launch companies without knowing whether they'll succeed. Scientists spend years testing ideas that may fail. Astronauts travel into environments humans were never meant to inhabit. The tools have changed. The courage has not. Then, something remarkable happened. Those early decisions, whether to follow a river, climb a mountain pass, or launch a fragile boat into open water, did far more than save one small group. Each successful journey became knowledge. Knowledge became stories. Stories became traditions. Traditions became the invisible maps that guided countless generations after them. Without realizing it, those forgotten travelers weren't simply finding new homes. They were building humanity's greatest inheritance. And thousands of years later, astonishingly, traces of that inheritance are still hidden inside every one of us. The ancient compass still inside you. The most remarkable map ever created was never drawn. It was inherited. Right now, as you watch this video, your brain is quietly doing something your ancestors depended on every single day. Without thinking, you remember where your front door is. You know how to walk from your bedroom to the kitchen in complete darkness. You recognize shortcuts through familiar neighborhoods. You instinctively notice when something in a familiar room has been moved. These may seem like ordinary abilities. In reality, they are echoes of an ancient survival system that helped humans conquer an entire planet. Scientists have discovered that the human brain contains specialized networks that continuously build internal maps of the world around us. As we move, these neural systems update our position almost automatically, helping us understand where we are and how to return home. Millions of years of evolution shaped this remarkable ability. Every ancestor who successfully found water, remembered a safe cave, or led their family back to camp passed on genes that favored better navigation. Generation after generation, that invisible compass grew more refined. But then something unexpected happened. Civilization arrived. Road signs replaced landmarks. Paper maps replaced memory. Today, satellites orbiting hundreds of miles above Earth tell us exactly where to turn. GPS has become so reliable that many people feel lost the moment their phone battery dies. Ironically, the smarter our technology has become, the less we often rely on the extraordinary navigation system inside our own heads. Researchers have even noticed that people who regularly depend on GPS tend to pay less attention to the surrounding landscape. Instead of building detailed mental maps, they simply follow instructions. Turn left, turn right, you have arrived. Convenient? Absolutely. But it also reminds us how much knowledge our ancestors carried without a single electronic device. And that's when this story comes full circle. Remember that family standing at the edge of an unknown valley? Or the sailors staring across an empty sea? They weren't fearless because they knew exactly what waited ahead. They were courageous because they moved forward despite not knowing. Every continent we live on, every nation that exists today, every city, village, and road began with someone willing to take one more step into the unknown. The world wasn't discovered all at once. It was discovered one careful observation at a time, one remembered landmark, one shared story. One successful journey passed from parent to child across thousands of generations. The first maps of Earth were never drawn with ink. They were written in memory, they were carried in songs, they lived in stories whispered beside flickering campfires beneath the same stars we still see tonight. Perhaps that's the greatest lesson of all. The greatest tool our ancestors ever used wasn't a compass, a ship, or a map. It was the human mind curious enough to ask what lay beyond the next horizon, brave enough to go and see, and wise enough to remember the way home. And somewhere deep inside each of us, that ancient traveler is still quietly searching for what lies just beyond the horizon.